first thing you want to do is click on your data tab, and you should see over on the top right-hand side data analysis. If you don't see it, stop this video, go back to the previous one that goes through how to activate it in Excel. Once you get it, click on it, and it brings up this toolbox. And there's a whole bunch of very useful tools in it, but all we're going to focus on today is regression. So they're in alphabetical order, so if you don't already have it clicked in the blue box, click on it and say, okay. Then you'll see I already have some data in here because when you use regression and you go in and redo something, it will populate it with the previous data, but I want to clear it all out. So first time you go in, it should look like this. So what things do we have to use in input? Well, first you got to do the input, which is your X and Y ranges. So remember, Y is the dependent variable. That's what we're trying to predict. In this case, I'm using the data back from a few videos ago of using what week it is to predict what your sales will be in the flower shop. So what we're trying to predict is not week, but sales. So you want to block off the sales amount and then just come down and click on the X value, which X in this case is our independent variable, what we're using to predict the dependent one, which is weeks. So we're going to come here and block that all off. So that's our data that we're using. When I was blocking off this data, I included the labels at the top. And you want to do this because it helps a whole lot when you're looking back at your Excel regression output if you've got those labels, and we'll see why in a minute. But so when you do that, you got to come over here and click labels. If you don't, it will try and run regression and it will look at weeks and sales and say, that's not data, I can't run it. If you get that error that says, you have non-numeric data, it's probably because you included a label and forgot to click that. Also, if I click labels, but I forgot to include weeks and sales, it will take that first line of 1 and 19 and it will think 1 is the label for the week column and 19 is the label for the sales column. Won't include those in your calculation, so your line, you will get less accurate regression line. So you always have to make sure about that. There's that. The rest of the stuff we don't need to worry about. Output range, normally, I'd probably send it to a different sheet, I guess it is. But I want it all to show up on this page. So I'm going to click here and just say, let's have it start up over there so we can see everything on one screen. And then you run OK. And voila, Excel has just run the regression output and done a whole bunch of different calculations. There's a lot of numbers on this screen. There is a lot of useful information. We will not be covering some of it. The things we want to know and get from this that we've talked about already is first the equation. So remember, we've got an equation and we've got, different coefficients that go with our independent variables. So looking at the output, where do you think we get the coefficients from? Down here in the bottom section, all the way on the left-hand side, you see it says coefficients. And so I've been calling these things coefficients. And so good place to look. And then we've got an intercept. And remember, we talked about our equation. We have a y-intercept plus a coefficient times our independent variable. So there's our coefficient there's our y-intercept of 19.15. And then we've got this thing where it says weeks. And that's what came from including that label. So we know it's my independent variable weeks, and that's the coefficient that goes with it. From here, we can see that the equation for this data would be y equals 19.15 plus 1.2, we'll round it to, times x1, which is independent variable for weeks. I'm going to put the coefficients just up here so they're by my data. You don't have to do this, but sometimes I like to pull them off of Excel output and, label them separately. So there are my equations for my coefficients for my line. So just like for our heuristic forecast methods, all of those error calculations we did, you can do for regression. So you just have to come up with the forecast. So just like before, if we were using naive or simple moving average, we'd create a forecast. So for regression, we would come up here, take B0 plus B1, and then it would be times the value of the independent variable, which in this case is weeks. And there is the forecast that we would have for that specific week. Now, if we wanted to do this, we'd have to come up here and change the C1 and C2 and make them dollar signs and copy them all the way down. We've been through that before. You could copy this, and then you'd have the forecast for every week. That's the equation. The other piece of it we've gone through is R squared. And if you look right over here, there is R squared, and there is the value of it. And remember, what did we tell? That R squared has a value of 0 to 1. So this is really close to 1. So this would say that, we have a very good line that based on the weeks moving forward, it does a very good job of predicting what our sales are going to be. Then below it, you see something called adjusted R. What that is, R squared has been adjusted. And the reason it is when you start having more than one independent variable. It's adjusted slightly because R squared gets inflated the more independent variables you have, and adjusted R squared is a better interpretation. Then we've got standard error. And remember that we talked about standard error and how it's the square root of root mean squared error that we learned how to calculate. I haven't talked about the one on the top, multiple R. What is multiple R? It's the square root of R squared. So let's just check and make sure this is really what it is. And you see if we take R squared, square root it, we get R. And one other thing that we'll cover in this video is this observations. It's 10 because there are 10 observations. This is an important thing to always double check once you run the regression, because I often see it. You think you've blocked off all 10 and you've maybe only gotten 9, or if you blocked off all 10 and forgot the weeks in sales and said to use it as labels, it would use the first line as a label. So then it would say it was only using 9 observations. So this is just a good quick check to make sure the regression equation was created using the right amount of data.